God almighty, it's the middle of summer and the rain outside, you wouldn't believe it. You just wouldn't believe it. I was halfway through the podcast, right? And it started pouring, and you could hear it on the roof. And the noise it was making, it was so bad that I had to stop the podcast and start again. And if it's showers, then the danger is there'll be more showers. So what I'll do is I'll get on with things as best I can. Now, there's people, I'd have friends, and they'd be saying, oh, that's a very bad sign, the wet summer is a sign of climate change. And climate change is a sign that we're on the edge of some sort of terrible catastrophe and, millions will die and it'll all be terrible. I'm not entirely enthusiastic about that view, you might presume, I suppose. And the reason being is that I would accept that there's climate change, there's no doubt about that. And it's been going on for centuries and thousands and tens of thousands of years. And we may be experiencing kind of a quirky change at the moment. Did human activity contribute to it? I would say yes, it probably did. There's no doubt about that. But did it contribute to it in a way that's going to lead to a catastrophe? Well, I don't know, but I would be reluctant to take on that belief, right? Because it seems to me a very despairing view. It's like saying that, the humans are sort of bad and we have ruined everything. And that's a huge guilt to put on yourself. And I think it's a huge guilt to put on children, young people coming up. I think it would be better to say to young people that, there's a huge amount of people, 7 billion people on the planet, and the amount of improvements that there have been for most of the people on the planet over the past 40 years has been phenomenal. And there's a great philosopher called Steven Pinker, and he's the guy that I do read in relation to being positive about the way the earth has developed and the way society has developed. We do have lots of problems. And if you look at politics in Europe or politics in America, yeah, there's lots of problems. Maybe we'll get a very, left-wing government, then we get a right-wing government, and maybe both sides always see the other as completely evil, like there's nothing good you can say about right-wing people if you're on the left, and there's nothing good you can say about left-wing people if you're on the right. And there was a great comment made by Barack Obama about 8 years ago when Donald Trump was elected, and people were, in high dudgeon and terrified that it was going to be the end of the world if Trump got into the presidency in America. And Barack Obama said a lovely thing. He said, sometimes there's no need to worry because history doesn't go straight. History goes in crooked lines. It goes one way. It goes sideways to the left, and then it'll go sideways to the right. It zigzags, if you like. I thought that was a very astute comment, And I feel that really about when you talk about climate change. And I'm talking about it because I had such a shower of rain in the past 10 minutes. I couldn't believe it. It was extraordinary. But rather than to see it as a catastrophe, I would feel that the human species has solved so many problems up to now and has made life so good for so many. Obviously, there are people in terrible suffering as we speak. There are people in terrible poverty and degradation, and there's people in slavery, and there's people in societies which are totalitarian, and there's so many terrible things happening in the world, and there is an access we have to politics now through the internet that we didn't have 40 years ago. So you can become inundated with the negative, and you can miss the fact that the bigger picture is that the past 1,000 years has been a gradual improvement of the human condition and the evolution of civilization. And it's very, very likely, that as we go further with confidence in our civilization, just as other things were invented in the past and we discovered how to make railways and how to use steam and how to use electricity and how to use microchips, just as all that happened, it's highly likely that there will be further inventions and ideas and insights that will solve or accommodate humans to the inevitable modification of the climate. So the climate will continue to change, but humans will learn to live in it. And I think that there are some amazing experiments going on, places in the Middle East. I don't know much detail, it's just what I'd see in the newspaper or on the internet, but they seem in some places to be really working in a powerful way to harness solar energy and to fuel new designed buildings. And there's other places that use nuclear power, and I know that loads of people will be against nuclear power. But I have to say, I wouldn't be the one to decide yes or no for nuclear power, because I'm not a scientist. And if scientists said we should use nuclear power, even though it has dangers as well, I would trust them. Basically, I trust the future. I actually trust, when I look at young people, I trust them. That's the bottom line. I look at young people, for example, in the Mooney School, the Mooney Summer School, in Drumshambo. It's on this week. It's still on today and tomorrow. And I was down a few times during the week, hanging around the streets and listening to the music, and out of the pubs listening to sessions. And when I'm listening to people, and I'm seeing so many young people, and they can play the violin, the fiddle, or the uilleann pipes, or the bouzouki, or they can play the flute, or the concertina. And they're so skilled at it. You just have great hope in the future. You have hope, not in Irish music, but in everything that young generation does. And what I see also sometimes at a thing like the Mooney School is the connection there is between old people and young people. You'll constantly see sessions where young people are engaged with older people, all sitting around playing music. And then I trust in humanity. And when I see people who forgive each other, like when I hear of stories that went on in families where people were at loggerheads with each other and they were arguing, sometimes after a death it can happen, that there's a big row. And when I see the way that people forgive each other, I know of somebody now who did that recently, because there was 3 or 4 years where, they were fractured from their family. And gradually, bit by bit, they came back together. And it was almost time that healed the wound, Time and the wisdom not to say too much. It's always the big wisdom. Don't put coal on the fire. A fire is a description of kind of negative energy that's boiling inside you. So you're having a war with somebody, and it's like a fire. So the one thing to do is don't put coal on it. Don't make it worse by what you say. Say nothing. Be quiet. And let time heal things. And I have no other word for this except the grace of God. That idea of grace, it was like something in the air. It wasn't coming from you, but like air, you were breathing it in. And without air, you would die. And with air, you you energized your body. The air came in. And I remember an old priest one time saying to me that grace is like, it's in the air. It's outside yourself, and yet it is this energy that you get. And we call it like the grace of God. That there's something comes into us. It's like a softness. It's like olive oil. It's like olive oil on bread. It softens it. And it softens us to the point that we want to embrace our enemy. We're sitting there thinking of some, mother or father that we've had a row with, or some child we've had a row with, or some, brother or sister or aunt or some neighbour we've had a row with. And as time goes on, you can't really hold on to the anger. It's amazing, but it's unnatural. It's unnatural for a human to hold on to anger. And yet it can possess us. But it's just a disturbing emotion. It's like a cloud in the sky. And beyond the cloud there is a clear blue sky. And if you don't feed it, if you don't activate the energy of negativity, of anger, it'll dissolve. And you'll end up sitting in the kitchen. This is an image I've had, maybe sitting in the kitchen and thinking about some neighbour or somebody you work with, a colleague, and you're feeling negative to them to the point that you're blind with rage and anger. And it goes on not for weeks, but for years. We can hold on to anger for an awful long time. And then someday comes, and it's usually because you got another little bit of information. Something happens like you hear a good thing about this bad person. You think they're a bad person, and then somebody says, they're very good to their disabled child, or they're very good to their mother who's an old woman, or they do some charity work in the town. And you hear this other side of them. And all of a sudden, it's like you're tired being angry with them. Your anger has gone on for years. And you can flip in that moment. You can just turn over and think, what am I angry with that person for? Nothing. And the other time that we tend to let go of anger is when something bad happens to us, when you end up in Beaumont, or you end up in the hospital ward, and somebody comes into your mind that you've, nurtured as a sort of an enemy. You've been nurturing negativity and anger against some particular person, and then you're in hospital and you're realizing how short life is, and how soon it could be over, and you suddenly realize, my God, why would I waste? Why would I waste a minute being negative or being angry? And it's true to say, I really feel it's true to say we all are the same in this. Like, I can only tell you this because I know it from the bad side, I know it from the point of view of somebody who has often been obsessively angry with somebody else and nurtured it and nursed it for months and decades, years and decades. I know it in myself that anger can sustain itself like a fire inside you for a very long time. But I also know that you can flip it, you can dissolve it in a moment. And it's the moment you hear something beautiful about the other person. Or you put yourself in their shoes and you begin to realize you may have a negative anger with that particular person, but maybe that person is very kind and compassionate to somebody else. Now that's a very big Buddhist idea where, you divide all the people around you, you divide them into friends, enemies, and strangers. And so you think about your enemies. Now, by enemy, I just mean somebody that you're hostile to, that you don't like, that you have no time for. I've no time for that old one. That kind of person. And think about them, or somebody that you feel genuinely did you wrong. Insulted you or made some, nasty comment to you at some point, and you hold on to it and you feel a kind of resentment. So the Buddhist practice is when you're thinking about that person and you have a category of people, you have a group of people that you're thinking about, like negative people, that you'd call your enemies. And you remind yourself that there was a time when they were your friends. It's where you invite yourself into the idea of, the transmigration of souls, as they used to say, maybe in the 1st or 2nd century in Christianity, and they used to talk about the possibility of a reincarnation, that the purification process might involve more than one lifetime. And I don't care how crazy that is as an idea in terms of modern rational scientific life. But I have to tell you that the effect of it on me, when I embrace it as a possibility, it gives me an enormous release, of joy. And it's a very strange idea to the West, I know. Reincarnation is like what the Buddhist Tibetan philosopher is saying, is that we have been here, we have been present in beginningless time. We have been here forever, if you like, because we have been here outside time. And outside time doesn't mean very far back in time, it means outside time, which is eternity. We're grounded in eternity, the Buddhist is saying. Not too far from what the Christian is saying. Grounded in the forever moment. The moment of being present now has been repeating itself and going on forever and will continue. So in one sense, we are already enlightened. We are already in heaven. And again, this is very close, very similar in Buddhist idea and Christian idea, because the Christian talks about the sense that we are already, in Christ, we are already in the glory of God, even though we're still living through this linear time. And the Buddhist says the same, that we are already a completed Buddha, but it's simply we're dimmed by this present time. And we're dimmed by our own karma. The delusion that there is a self that can experience negativity and possess anger and feel, I'm a person who hates that other person, He is my enemy. That kind of sense of identity, the Buddhist is saying that's only a delusion, that doesn't really exist. You are not that self. You're not that self at all. You're actually enlightened if you just let go of all the disturbing emotion. And then they have this exercise, which is to think about the person that is your enemy in this life may on a previous life have been your mother. Now that's what they say. Like, they say it as a kind of a mental exercise. It's a really interesting thing to do. And they don't divide it into men and women here. It's like you could be thinking of men around you who are your enemies, but it's like you try and say that that particular human, that particular sentient being is a reincarnation of a presence of a being that was once my mother, nurtured me like a mother nurtures a child. There's a love, and that person loved me like that one time. That's an amazing thing to say. And as I said to you, it doesn't mean that you need to swallow all that as a literal truth, but certainly if you contemplate it like a kind of a mental idea, it expands your mind, and it really expands your heart. It really opens your heart. If I'm looking at, now we'll take just randomly somebody famous to do this on, and I hope this is okay, but I'll take the cliche of somebody like Donald Trump, because there's a lot of hostility to Donald Trump. And this may go into a point where it sounds absurd, but to take my system of Tibetan Buddhist practice on reincarnation, it is, imagine if, let's suppose you actually really knew Donald Trump and he was the guy you work with in your office, and you felt very negative about him. Well, you're trapped, you see, in that negativity. It's the other thing about, being negative or having anger. You're trapped in it. It's like being in a cage. You can't get out of it. You can't even think about something else, because if you're annoyed with somebody, if you're angry with somebody and I'm talking to you, you can't hear a word I'm saying because you're stuck with the obsessional negativity inside you. That's a real trap. And they also have an image for that. In Tibetan Buddhism, they talk about that like being in a cage. It's like a cage just about the size of your body, made from iron bars, and you're trapped in it. And then what they say is, the cage is thrown into a river. Now that's the condition of human life if you have anger in you. So says the Buddha, the Buddhist. But what I'm saying is, if you think somebody in your office, let's say, was like Donald Trump, and you were obsessed with a kind of an anger about him, well, you wouldn't be able to eat your dinner, because you'd be thinking about him all the time. And people around you would be saying, would you ever shut up talking about Donald Trump? You have me sick in the head listening to you, because you're always going on about Donald Trump. Maybe, in fact, that is the truth for many situations with the real Donald Trump, because we tend to get obsessed and we talk our negativities about somebody. We get up in the morning and no matter who we're talking to giving off about what we're negative about. So that's a real trap. And if you think that the practice I'm talking about is sort of saying that person in a previous life, not as Donald Trump, but the energy, the consciousness, the mind, the soul of this presence was once my mother in a previous life. Maybe we were, maybe we weren't even humans. Maybe we were some other form of sentient being. And when you think like that in Buddhist ideas, it's simply stretching the imagination. It's a way of taking down the walls of reality. The walls of reality that limit us to this claustrophobic moment that says, I don't like you, I'm angry with you, and I'm trapped in this like in a cage. Well, I might as well be thrown into a river. This is no life. If I have a sense of anger, it's no life. Now, how do I get out of it? Where is the key? And I'm saying that sometimes, for some people, the idea of reincarnation opens the door. Because it says that you're not stuck in just this life. This life is simply a ripple. It's a ripple. And it was preceded by a previous ripple. And there will be another ripple. And the more you kind of disengage from your anger, the more beautiful will be the next ripple. So you're already in heaven when you let go of disturbing emotion. When you let go of anger, even if it was only anger you let go of, you don't have to work through everything. It's an amazing thing about, I find this amazing both in Christianity and in Buddhism, that both of them make it simple. It's like there might be 7 deadly sins, and anger might be one of them, and gluttony might be one of them. But in fact, if you beat one, you'll beat them all. Because it's the same enemy manifesting as gluttony or anger or jealousy or whatever the other 7 deadly sins are. I forget for the minute, but let's just take those 2, gluttony and anger, because they're quite different. And yet what I'm saying is that to reach peace, and I mean, I'm talking all the time about some sort of supernatural reality, some transcendent reality, some eternity that is in the present moment. That right now, as you're listening to this, you're listening to it in linear time, you're listening to the vibration of your, phone or headphones or whatever, you're listening. But your consciousness is also rooted in a kind of dimension that is outside time. It's transcendent. And in that listening, you're being challenged by disturbing emotions. Might be gluttony. Might be anger. Might be 7 of the others. But when you want to liberate yourself from that cage, that sense of being trapped in a kind of a dark, disturbing emotion, if you win with one, you'll win with them all. Once the door is open, the door is open. You let go of anger and you're free. And you're free in every respect. And you'll find that the next time you see a bar of chocolate that you want to devour with dental aggression, you won't feel so aggressive. And I think the other thing that happens when you let go of anger is that you begin to develop a huge sense of humor, right? You begin to find that things are funny. There was a joke they used to tell. Now, this is a really childish, silly joke. But there was a joke they used to tell years ago, and it was about a preacher, and a preacher came to give a mission in a church. And he says in his sermon, first day at the sermon, first sermon, a week mission, and he's there in the pulpit, and he says, eventually, everybody in this parish may go to hell. And there's a fella laughing. And the preacher said, I'm serious. We face judgment. We could end up in hell. Everybody in this entire parish. The fella's still laughing. And afterwards, the missioner says, he meets him outside and he says, what were you laughing at? And the man says, I'm not from this parish. Now, I told you it's a silly, childish joke, but I tell it because it illustrates that sense that we can escape. We can escape the terror of being trapped in a disturbing emotion, which really is another name for hell. We can release ourselves from that in a flash, in a second, because we are from elsewhere. We're not trapped in this anger. We're not trapped in this, if you like, in this parish, in this locality. Our being and our presence is so vast and big and different that we may have been manifesting in different lifetimes forever, and may continue to do so for another 1,000 lifetimes. And yet to step out of it is simply to take one moment, 1 second, and refuse to grasp the anger. Refuse to be grasped by the anger. It says that in Buddhist teachings, but Jesus is also saying the same thing, all the time to people. He's saying this joy of heaven is available to you now. It's available right now. And it's easy, just step into it. How do I do that? Love your enemy. I know it's not rocket science. And the humor thing, I find the lightness comes when I let go of my disturbing emotion, when I let go of anger, when I get low of jealousy. I don't feel empty then. It's like this other thing fills me. And this other thing is grace. We used to call it grace. It's a very hard kind of idea to get into now, and yet we all know it. I know when I see, say, the fiddle players and the uilleann pipers, and they're at the Mooney School, and they're sitting around, and there's an old fellow with them, and he's playing the button accordion, and he's absolutely rattling out the jigs and reels, and he's so magnificent, so talented. And there it all is, and when it's all over, about an hour later, and I'm there chatting to him, and I'm talking to him, I'm saying, God, you are playing great music. And he said to me, once you get into the flow, you don't think about it. It just comes through you. And that's what great musicians say, but I think it's also true for everybody. There's something about grace that we find hard to explain theologically. Like if I tried to explain it theologically, what is grace? Like we'd be here all day and it'd sound very obscure. And yet we all know it. We all know this feeling of being gifted, if you like. You know what I mean? You're just sitting there, you're listening to this podcast, or you're listening to the uilleann pipes in a session, or you're walking along the road and you're listening to the birds and the bees humming around you, or you're listening to the sound of the rain because it's raining very heavy on the roof. You're listening, you're being present at the moment you're in, and in that being present, there's something happens. And you experience it not as yourself, but as something other being present. There's something coming towards you. And if you submit to it, if you embrace it, if you rise up out of your bed in the morning with it, with St. Patrick's breastplate says, I rise today in the strength of the Trinity. Christ before me, Christ behind me. What a beautiful prayer. But if you rise with that sense of otherness, sense of somebody is bearing witness to you, somebody is holding your hand, somebody is saying you are not alone. If you're lonely and you're in the dark and you're worried because of illness or health or age or family problems. That there is a presence that's really just a step beside you that's saying, be not afraid. You're not alone. I'm with you. And you feel it. Oh gosh, but you feel it. You feel the presence of grace. And if you just surrender to that presence, you will find your anger dissolves. You will find all the negative, whatever is your thing, maybe it's gluttony or drinking or whatever. You'll find yourself being released from it. You'll find you're letting go of it because you've shifted your attachment, you see. You've shifted your attachment. Instead of being totally attached to your enemy and thinking day and night, what a bad, terrible person he is, you just let go of it. Let go of him. But how can I let go of him? What else would I hold on to? Right? Do you ever see a child who can't walk, they're about 2 years of age or something, and they're trying to walk, and they have one hand, and they're gripping the back of a chair, and you have the other hand, and their little hand is around your finger, and you're trying to get them to let go of the chair, but they won't. Well, we're all like that. We're holding on to the thing that we think it gives us some sort of security, holding on to our negativity, holding on to our anger, holding on to, our vice, whatever it is, our jealousy or something. And we're really gripping it. And we get up in the morning, we go through lunch and we go through evening meals. And in the back of the head is the same old narrative, the same old tape recorder of negativity going on all day long. And I say, well, let go of it. And you'd say, yeah, but how can I do that? I need it nearly. I need it for my balance as a human being to have this pet hate. And that's true. Unless you recognize grace. Recognize that when you're still, there is a presence with you which is not coming from you. You're not generating it. You're meeting it. You're encountering this presence, this consciousness. It's not generating out of your head. You're actually responding to it. And if you acknowledge that, if you just acknowledge that presence, that grace, for a moment, you'll be changed. You'll have found somebody to hold on to. You'll experience a joy. And whether you're Christian or Buddhist or Muslim or Hindu or Jew, after that you begin to extend that moment of presence because it's outside time. It's not on the surface of reality. It's a deep, deep experience of being human. And when you experience it, you allow the possibility of it to widen out to cover everything. That you have eternally been here. Therefore, what is here, what you're looking at in your own body, is only an illusion. It was like an illusion. It is also real. Because the depth of reality and the surface of reality are not two separate things. Body and soul are not two separate things. They're intertwined into the same single molecules and atoms. And yet we have this awakening of knowing ourselves as eternal, knowing ourselves as beyond time, and knowing ourselves as being embraced and loved by some presence that is within everything. It's relationship. And all that is a step away. And that, that's amazing. I'm going to read a little piece from the Irish Times, and it's a kind of a humorous piece, and I suppose it's a way to indicate how sometimes when you're living through something you can be angry. But in your mind, instead of being angry forever, instead of constantly being angry, and repeating the same experience like it was it's like watching the same film in your head over and over and over and over again for decades. So you're caught, imprisoned in this anger, and the narrative becomes the bars on the cage. And so how do you liberate yourself from that? Well, sometimes the remembrance of things can be a way of liberation. Because in the remembrance of things, you can sometimes remember the enemy as more human than you actually experienced. And also, you can begin to find it's funny. Samuel Beckett said, there's nothing as miserable. No, there's nothing as funny as misery. Our own misery, when we look back on it, seems funny. Why? Because we're at a distance. Because we're disengaging from it. We're not allowing it to repeat and repeat in our memory. So if a trauma is repeating itself in your memory, in your whole psyche, endlessly, you're in the trap of it. But sometimes remembrance can help liberate you from how you felt in that moment. For example, you can take a car crash that maybe somebody was in. I was in a few small skirmishes, right? So you imagine I'm at a roundabout and somebody comes sideways and they bang into me, and it's a car crash. And on the occasion of when it happened, in Mullingar, in 2007, I was distressed, The other car, there was a young driver, a young woman, and she was a learner driver, and I thought, like, her life is going to be ruined if this goes to the guards, and she should have had somebody with her, and blah, 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 and how much money it's going to cost me lovely little car was destroyed and all this. Oh, it was terrible. But a year later, I'm telling that story, let's say at a dinner party, and everybody's laughing. I say something like, did I tell you about the woman who ran into me at the roundabout in Mullingar? And everybody goes, no, tell us what happened. And we're all laughing. I'm describing something terrible. I learned that a long time ago, and it's probably what has helped me as a storyteller and as a writer, more than anything else. More than anything else, the awareness that when you look back on life, you can find it funny. So long as you're not trapped in that cage of repeating the disturbing emotion over and over again. If you loosen the grip or you in some way disengage from the disturbing emotion, you begin to see the fun in life. And one of the most certain ways that I have in my experience discovered for loosening that grip, for dissolving the anger, is not obsessing on it in itself, but turning the other way towards what I would call grace, towards the experience that there is another presence in the room that I am encountering, that I want to, let go my grip on anger the same way as the child might let go their grip on the chair because they suddenly realize that daddy is in front of them and they want to throw their two hands towards daddy. That sense of turning away from all the disturbing emotion that I do generate in my mind, turning away from it. And finding that the room is bigger and that history is bigger. And that my consciousness is even bigger by a million times than just this short lifetime of 70 or 80 years. This consciousness when I experience grace is an eternity that's happening now. I'm on a journey. And in that turning, in that experience of grace, I find a sense of humour. And it works. Okay, so my last little story to illustrate that. This was in the Irish Times about 2 weeks ago, or 3 or 4. We should take up golf, the General suggested. That's a wonderful idea, I agreed. It might keep us healthy. In fact, I learned a lot about life from golfers when I was young. I lived near the golf links, and I spent hours hidden in the bushes along the rough that skirted the fairways. I was looking for balls, and the easiest way to find them was to lie hidden near a difficult junction where players were liable to lose them. When players shot their balls into the rough and failed to find them, I noted where they had landed and could easily retrieve them when the player moved on. At 6 pennies per ball, this was a lucrative trade. I lay still for long periods of time on the flat of my back, listening to blackbirds and waiting for the next player to swing his club too hard and lose his balls in the long grass beside me. But it was a particular teacher whose voice always made me shiver. He drove a dark green Volkswagen and had little time for my ability at school. Normally he towered over me and ran his red pen across my copy with furious contempt, and I'd say that if he ever found me lying in the ditch trying to rob his balls, he'd have beaten me to a pulp with his golf club. If ignorance is bliss, he was wont to declare in class, then you shall have a happy Christmas. From such discouraging encounters in my educational development, I grew the conviction that I was a useless lump of dung, destined to get everything wrong in life. Although that has had some advantages. Acknowledging my stupidity has helped me to see that being wrong is a positive. One should always strive to be wrong. That's an outlook that has gifted me with a relish for philosophy, because in philosophy the answer is always ultimately wrong. But the sense of failure that was embedded in me during secondary school was layered deep and thick by the time I sat the leaving certificate. My teacher regularly indulged himself in the conviction that in terms of career I was likely to end up on the petrol pumps. A petrol pump attendant was not a position of great dignity in small-town Ireland, and I fear my teacher may have despised the poorer boys who spent their days filling the petrol tanks of the professional classes. He probably filled his own tank on Saturday mornings before driving his swanky Volkswagen to the golf club for his weekend round. Sometimes his balls did end up in the rough beside me, and he would approach me with his number 9 iron, not knowing I was there, of course. He'd be looking for the ball, and he'd beat the long grass like a man trying to beat out a pheasant. His fingernails were always perfectly manicured. He was fastidious in everything. So he always found the balls. And he'd sometimes give a grunt, a very private moment of self-satisfaction. Then I'd watch him move farther down the fairway towards the green, grunting as he clipped his ball ever closer to the flag on the green. But one morning I saw him in the distance teeing up a shot in the company of 3 other players. His club was an enormous driver, like a large teapot with an extremely long spout, and I sensed before he hit it that it was going to cause me trouble. He whacked it into the air and it fell just between my legs. I was terrified of being seen when he came close to where I lay. I could see the laces of his shoes through the blades of grass as he approached my little nest. Clearly, he wouldn't find it without finding me as well. But to my relief, he didn't even look. He checked if the other players were watching. They were not. So he took another ball from his pocket, dropped it to the ground, and shouted, "I have it!" He steadied himself for the next shot. The clack was definitive, mighty in its power, the ball flying into the clouds and far away until it passed over the green and landed in a small lake of water. The disaster was too much for him. "Fucking bollocks," he hissed under his breath, shoving the club back in the bag and marching onwards towards the green. It was difficult to stop myself from giggling. I was greatly enriched by the experience. It wasn't just because I now possessed one of his balls, but the encounter had contributed greatly to my moral development. Thank you if you're here, if you're listening, no matter where you're listening. I thank you for your presence, for keeping me company. And may the grace be with you. Thank you. Bye-bye.